Good morning, everyone. Ben here, or I guess it's afternoon now, but Today was actually supposed to be a video I uploaded yesterday. I just didn't have the time to. So I was going to continue the series I started on how to forecast elections by kind of going over how to look at polls, and there was just no national level poll that was of a hypothetical candidate matchup in a competitive area. However, we did get one today on Thursday, so I'm going to go ahead and record that. So, yeah, most people say that it's not at all common for voter fraud. By the way, this is going to be the top line results. Basically dead equal on keeping the Electoral College versus electing the popular vote winner. This means that we shouldn't change it because this is not a 2/3 majority. To all you constitutional amendment buffs out there, you know what that means. So when you go through, don't just look at the top line results. If you want to glance over them, see what their top line results are, that's good. And that's kind of what I'm doing. I want to see what the top line results are. Do you support expanding number of justices? No. Yeah, expanding the Supreme Court has always been a very unpopular idea. Wow, that's an old question. This is about where you'd expect it. That hasn't changed. Most people have a favorable opinion of Mueller or unsure. Yep. So most people think that, well, you can make a lot of interpretations based off of this data. I still don't understand. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe the obstruction of justice charge. This honestly should be the most likely one. I mean, there's tons of campaign finance violations and all that. I don't understand how, after the summary by the Attorney General. Now, obviously, people are going to say, well, the Attorney General is being flattering to his boss, the person who appointed him, but I'm skeptical of that. So, most people think it should be released, okay? I don't think they are, but apparently most people think they are, so whatever. Okay, that's an interesting one. Most people support the government regulating prescription drug prices. Well, see, the good thing is that we already have this, or at least the exceptions are so rare that it's not worth going into, and they're still covered by this because if somebody then goes and commits a crime with that firearm, the person who sold it to them is liable. Liable, not libel. Liable. Okay. So that's basically dead equal, and undecideds tend to favor the Republican when they do break, and likely this is still true, so I'm considering that dead even. This is dead even, maybe a point or two. This is a somewhat wide split, and again, we can assume that there would be a break. This would probably be the only break that would be about dead even between the Democrat and the Republican. And of course, this shows that it's well within the margin of error. But let's see the crosstabs. That's actually a little surprising. They got 47% of people watching Fox News. That's a very weird question, but okay. How common do you think voter fraud is in U.S. elections? So, I'm going to skip the Democrat-Republican breakdown, though you can get some interesting information from those. And I'm also going to skip the gender gap for right now, as the most accurate breakdown of any voting group is going to be by race. So white people tend to think it's more common than not. About 52% think it's somewhat common or even very common. About 45% thinks it's not common or doesn't happen at all. I don't think it's very common, so I'd fall into this category. African Americans don't think fraud happens. Hispanics are not particularly big into thinking fraud happens. And other races and ethnicities don't think it happens a ton. However, the plurality is held by those who think it's very common. So that is a interesting little breakdown. So let's go ahead and look. Gender is basically dead even on that question, for those of you who are curious. So the reason why I'm going by race is because I want to see what the crosstabs actually say and see if they got to their results properly, right? So whether or not to keep the Electoral College, well, that shouldn't be too surprising. There's a 15% gap in favor of the Electoral College by white people. That really shouldn't surprise anyone. African Americans tend to support a popular vote, as do Hispanics and other ethnicities and races. There is a gender gap here. Men favor the Electoral College more heavily than women favor a popular vote. Since no one really supports expanding, I don't really think this is that big of a question. Reasonable plurality on each side, except for African Americans who are basically dead equal. Support the current breakdown of the Supreme Court. There's no gender gap at all, except men favor almost 10% more than women favor the same. Okay. Hispanics, of course, obviously don't think Trump handled Hurricane Maria well. White people are more apathetic on that one. Most people favor Robert Mueller. I think every single group does, with a reasonable plurality, so that's not a real question. Seems like white people don't think that anyone committed crimes. Black people think Trump committed crimes. And that's the most common plurality among racial groups. And that matches what we would expect, at least based off of partisanship of groups. That's the other thing you have to remember, is there is partisanship in these racial groups. Again, most everybody, so I'm not even going to review that question. It's weird that people think that the Justice Department is trying to conceal information, but whatever. Again, that's an interesting question to include, but shows overwhelming support, so again, not really going to bother. Again, they're showing overwhelming support, but they're not they're kind of, this is a misleading question, and I don't think they understand the laws regarding that, but okay, whatever. If the election for president, okay, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, who would you vote for? So there's a lot of undecided vote in the African American group, but the fact that he's getting 18%, that's 10% more African American support than he got in the 2016 election. So if this is an accurate poll and reflective of the percentage of the black population that Donald Trump can be expected to get in 2020, he's going to win the election going away with it. Because that means that the white voters who list themselves as someone else or unsure, they're going to vote much more heavily in his favor. And he'll probably get a few of these undecideds. Same thing with Hispanics, but this is a little bit, it's only 3% under what he got. So he's not performing poorly. This is about where he got with other voters, so other ethnicities. This is a little bit below, but the gap is similar. So, and then looking at the gender gap, it's pretty equal, but Sanders does better among women than Trump does among men. Interestingly, there's a higher amount of Democrats who are unsure whether or not they'd support Bernie Sanders. So this top line result of 44-45 in favor of Sanders is not accurate based off of that number alone and this number, 83, 5, and 12, that number alone. It really isn't. So I'm not entirely certain that this top line result is correct based off of that. And again, versus Kamala Harris, Trump with a single percentage point lead, he should have about a 2, maybe 3% lead based off of just this number alone. Because African Americans historically vote about 88% in favor of the Democrat, and Republicans are lucky to get 10% of the African American vote. Most of the time they're hovering at about 8%. And again, this gender gap seems a little low, but okay. This is about where you would expect. And again, they're also showing higher amounts of Democratic undecided voters, but I think part of that has to do with the fact that there's no nominee. And again, there's the African American vote. If that's accurate, and wow, against Biden, Trump actually cracks that 20%. And it seems that this is relatively stable because I remember the last one they released, Trump was getting somewhat lower, but approximately the same figures among black voters, which is really weird. And even if I assume that's an overestimation, I can't assume a 10% overestimation despite historical precedent, because that would say that their methods of reaching African American voters are just wrong. In addition, it assumes that polling data is 100% inaccurate. Maybe that their results are showing it, and if we assume about a 6% margin of error for one of these subgroups, which is reasonable, I'd love to see what the margin of error for this subset is. I'd assume it's about 6 to 7%. That's still 13, 14, 15% support, which is almost double what a Republican usually gets. So I would love to see. So 37% were Democrats, 31% were Republicans, 32% were independents. They could have either increased the number of Republicans in their sample or slightly decreased the number of Democrats in their sample, but it's within what I would consider a margin of error, so I don't see any real reason to complain. they've got the gender gap about correct. This is about correct, though I would like to see them boost up the Hispanic numbers a slight amount at the expense of the white vote. But then again, a lot of Hispanic voters identify as white, and they're more likely to vote Republican because of that. Maybe not because of it, but it's just an interesting symptom. Unfortunately, I don't get the margin of error for each group, but yeah. So always look at the crosstabs just to put the context of top-line results in perspective. And always look for the margin of error of each subset that you look at. And you can choose to break it down by gender, you can choose to break it down by partisanship, you can choose to break it down by race. I prefer looking at race because it's the most accurate of the crosstabs. Because that's the one that winds up reflecting the actual results of an election. So that should put these numbers in perspective. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy. Bye.